Amazing. Hello again. That was a fast 5 minutes. I don't know whether it was actually 5 minutes. So as we said, thank you very much. This is the Cozy Conference. Every quarter, Ignite Liverpool runs in the top floor of Leaf on Bold Street. And the idea is that speakers can talk about anything they like for 5 minutes, and they get 20 slides of 15 seconds each. So they've all made their slides, and they're all on my laptop, and they've got no control over the slides. So the slides advance. And hopefully we'll get a good selection of talks over the day. So today we've covered already sustainability in the city, and we talked about things like plastics and recycling and utopias and how we can make utopias. Now we're about to talk about medicine and longevity. We've got some really interesting talks coming up about postmortality and posthumanism and all sorts of cool stuff. And then at 3 o'clock we've got a couple of talks. 5? Somehow we're going to squeeze 5 talks in about governance and society. And then right at the end of the day, we've got 2 talks about transportation. And the idea for all of these talks is, what is the world going to be like in 2049? So 30 years from now, we're going to take a look at what's happening right now and try and see whether we can extrapolate out into 2049. And starting us off is Michael, who's head of philosophy at the University of Liverpool. Is that correct? Amazing. So I will get your slides up and then we can get going.
Right, so post-mortality for all. If you're not familiar with the term post-mortality, it means you don't have to die anymore, right? Whereas immortality would mean you cannot die, which is impossible. But post-mortality might be possible. Now we have dreamed of that for a long time. There are ancient myths talking about immortality, living forever, staying forever young. This is a fountain of youth. Donald Duck tried it out. And of course it didn't go according to plan. He's much younger than expected. Today we don't need myths, we have science trying to figure out what causes aging, what we can do about it, how it can be stopped, how it can be possibly be reversed. And since this is a biological problem, there is a real chance that science will figure it out. In 1998, when Bova wrote a book on immortality 20 years ago, saying physical immortality is within sight. There are people living today who might live forever, right? 1998, today, 20 years later, there are biogerontologists working on the problem. They think we can figure it out. Who knows, perhaps in 30 years' time, we will finally have figured it out. And then, perhaps, all of us who are still around at the time, might not have to die anymore, at least not as a part of the natural process of aging, right? How would that be like, right? Would it be a good thing? Would it be a bad thing? Well, you might say it's a good thing because life is good, so more life is also a good thing. Also, you won't have to lose people to death. And there are lots of things that you might be able to do that you cannot do now because you just don't have the time for it. However, there are also negative sides, right? If you think about death, you might not like it and think, no, I don't want it. But from that, it doesn't follow that you want to live forever, because forever is a very long time, and it might have its own horrors if you think of that. Also, you might get bored, not only by the stuff you do, you have done everything, have seen everything, but also bored by yourself, right? Because you're stuck with yourself in a certain way. And you might say, well, you can always kill yourself, right? So you have nothing lost. But is that something we want, that suicide is actually the only way out, which is not perhaps the right thing to have? Also, if you have to end your life deliberately, then what is lost is a certain shape of life, a certain narrative, right? You have a rise, you have a decline, and lives come to an end. There's a certain beauty and a certain rightness to this. Also, the fear of death might actually rise. Now we can always tell ourselves, well, we have to die anyway, at some stage, right? We might want to postpone it as long as possible, but we know it's going to happen. Then it might not happen. there's no space for new people either. We will occupy all the roles, and new people would have no place whatsoever. Then, of course, there's a problem of overpopulation, right? We have got enough people already. We get more and more. If no one dies anymore, then this will only increase the problem. So you might say, well, we can deal with that, right? We just don't have any children anymore. But is that a consequence that we want? No longer have children? How would the world look like without children, right? Some might say it's great, we don't need them. Others might say there's a loss here, right? But it might be even worse than that, because governments might decide, well, we cannot cope with children anymore, so we just prohibit children, right? Or you have to agree that you get killed if you have children. Some philosophers have actually suggested that. John Harris from Manchester talked about generational cleansing. And there's finally the problem of evil, which also becomes immortal then, and we might not get rid of certain people who are in power, right? So death also has its good sides. Death is not necessarily bad for us, for the one who dies, and other people's death is not bad for us. On the contrary, it often is very good for us. So I think we need to acknowledge that we are beings who live in time, and that living in time is actually a good thing, not something that we should try to overcome as much as possible. So, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Michael. Very thought-provoking. Next up, we've got another question of living longevity and how aging could be cured, if we wanted it to be, with Pedro Magalhaes. Close enough?
Good attempt.
Good enough. For somebody called Zarino Zapier, like I'm no good at pronouncing other people. Thank you very much. Thank you. Take it away. Oh, I need to put your slides on.
Yes, I can test my mic. I think it's working good. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. So, is it working now? Okay, thank you. So I'm here to discuss about what are the prospects of how long we're going to live in 50 years. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, life expectancy has been increasing. 150 years ago, we used to live about 40, 45 years. Now in some countries over 80. And this is thanks to various medical breakthroughs. Now, on one hand, that's wonderful, but of course, on the other hand, it means we have an aging population. We have an increased incidence of age-related diseases like cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, heart diseases, which is a major social, economic, biomedical problem. So why not fix aging? Now that's a picture of me when I was a child, because that was something I figured out when I was a kid. You know, we can cure infectious diseases, so why not can we cure aging as well? So what are the prospects of actually doing that? Well, first of all, from a biology perspective, we don't well understand the human aging process. We don't understand well yet why we age at the molecular cellular levels. There are some hints, in particular at the level of DNA. So for those who are not familiar, so the DNA encodes it. It's in our cells, nucleus of all our cells, and it encodes, determines our proteins. And the proteins are the machines of life that make all sorts of cell functions and determine our characteristics. You know, whether you're blonde hair or black hair, for instance. And we also know that damage to the DNA accumulates with aging. As we grow older, there's mutations that occur. And this causes problems at the cell level, cell loss, cell dysfunction, and it is thought as one possible cause of aging. And even more impressively than that, however, is the fact that we can manipulate DNA in animals, not in humans, to change the process of aging. So in tiny worms that live only a few weeks, we can change one gene and make them live for several months. They live 10 times longer. Even in mammals, in mice, we can change one single gene in the lab, and mice live 50% longer. So if we could do that to humans, it would mean humans living 150 years. And we also know in humans there's an impact of genetics and how long we live. So, for example, a single mutation in a single gene can accelerate the process of aging. So this is a disease called Werner syndrome, where a single mutation results in patients that develop all sorts of aging pathologies much earlier in life. Likewise, we know genetics plays a role in how long we live. So this is Jean Calment. She lived to be 122. She was very fond of port wine from my hometown, chocolate, and she smoked a lot. So there must have been something genetic to determine her extreme longevity. The other huge technological breakthrough that we see now is at the level of DNA sequencing. You know, it's very cheap now to sequence genomes. You can sequence your own genome for about $1,000 nowadays. So my lab and others have been using this to study some amazing organisms. One of these organisms is the naked mole rat, and we're interested in these animals not just because of their good looks, but also because they live extraordinarily long and they're very cancer resistant. Similarly, we're also studying another species, which is the bowhead whale. These are the second biggest animals on Earth after the blue whale, and they've been estimated to live over 200 years. So they must have natural mechanisms that protect against age-related diseases like cancer. So we sequence their DNA, and then we can try to infer what changes occur that affect, that have molecular effects. So for example, these are proteins from the bowhead whale, where we looked at subtle changes in the bowhead whale that affect the functions of the proteins that we think confer longevity and resistance to diseases. And at the extreme, there's even some animals that appear not to age at all, like some fishes, turtles, and salamanders. So aging is neither inevitable nor universal. And in theory, just like natural selection can do, so we can overcome aging. So from a practical perspective, what we're trying to do is learn from the DNA of animals like the bowhead whale and the naked mole rat, and then develop drugs, or maybe even in the future develop gene therapies so that we all can be disease resistant and live longer. And we actually know that it is possible also to manipulate aging in animals, even by drugs. So there's longevity drugs now that retard aging in animals. Only about 15-20% though, it's less by genetic manipulations. So this is a field with a huge interest. So there's lots of companies now, for example, trying to discover these longevity drugs to make people live longer. The best example is probably Google, who invested about $1 billion in a company trying to solve aging. So there's huge efforts from companies and from laboratories to develop drugs that allow people to live longer by slowing the process of aging. So I don't think we're going to cure aging anytime soon, but I do think in 50 years we'll have retarded the process of aging and we'll be living longer, healthier lives, disease resistance, thanks to manipulating aging. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Finally, we've got Lucy, who's a PhD candidate again at the university, Liverpool University, giving a good showing today. This is amazing. Talking about body modification.
Hello, is that all right? Okay. Brilliant. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you guys about modifications of the body and the medical advances that may lead us in the where medical advances may lead us in the future. So to do this, I'm going to talk a bit about science fiction, author Paolo Bacigalupi, and present some haunting possibilities of where medicine may lead us. So when we think about technologization of the body or body modifications within medicine, we often think of pacemakers or titanium plates that we put into our body when our bones get broken, or prosthetic limbs. Mike Featherstone, in his study of body modifications, suggests that the need or want for these modifications is the sense of taking control of your body or fighting its natural functions. So medically speaking, another good example would be the Mirena coil or the IUS that you put into your body, and it controls the hormones and prevents pregnancy. In another study, Robert Wilson suggests that internal or external extensions of the body and body modifications can correct defects, such as wearing glasses. They help the user to see clearly while still reminding the user of their original defect, namely flawed eyesight. But these are just examples of technologization and modification today. So within medication today, that is what we would think of. But where will medicine lead us? What will we consider as the defect in the coming years? What will we try to take control of? So Paolo Bacigalupi published a collection of short stories in 2008. And some of these short stories explore these possibilities. One story, Pop Squad, is based in a very near future. the humans seem much the same. They have jobs, hobbies, opinions, partners, friends, but there are two key differences. The first being that medical advances have exceeded what anyone ever believed was possible. A medication has been created called Reju, and once you choose to begin taking this medication, it keeps you young and prevents you from dying. When reading this story, it becomes apparent that Reju was potentially created in the very near future, maybe even 2049, and that everyone has been living without sickness and death for about 100 years. However, the second key difference is that nobody has any children anymore, because Reju not only gives you ultimate control of your body and its natural functions, i.e. preventing death, it also has an additive that makes you infertile. This prevents the world from becoming overpopulated. So, whilst this story is set in about 100 years' time, the medical advances leading up to this period are quite revealing. In the contemporary day, longevity appears to be a preoccupation within medicine. There are anxieties concerning keeping people alive, keeping people healthy, and curing every illness that's going. But alongside these anxieties is the growing fear of overpopulation. People are living longer, and more people are being born every day. The birth-to-death ratio in June 2019 is 2.4. There are over double the amount of documented births a day than there are documented deaths, which is where our contemporary anxieties lie. Okay, so going back to Bacigalupi's short story, the introduction of Reju, the medicine, a modification, it's a really good way of taking control of your life and your fertility. However, this does appear to be an almost fanciful and amusing answer to contemporary fears. So in Pop Squad, Bacigalupi changes people's views. Rather than people being concerned by mortality or overpopulation, being afraid of death, they see mortality or having children as something disgusting, a defect that just needs to be corrected, or a natural function that needs controlling. If nobody dies, there's no need to procreate. Reju does solve this problem by making users infertile as well as making them immortal. However, if you choose to stop taking Reju, you are able to procreate again. But children become the most wanted. You will be inevitably caught and live out your days in a mortal work camp. In this, Bacigalupi appears to explore the extreme answers to contemporary anxieties and circling the question, if there really was a fountain of youth, what price would we be willing to pay to drink it? Bacigalupi confronts the idea of medically controlling the body by presenting this haunting possibility of what the world could look like. Although this kind of body modification is not possible today, Bacigalupi's short story explores this possibility, and it explores where these medical preoccupations and fears might lead us. Contemporary science fiction authors, such as Bacigalupi, provide us with confrontations of these fears, and enable us to ask and potentially answer the question, what will humans do next, and what will life be like in 2049? Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Lucy. So we've had 3 talks about anti-aging and longevity, 2 about maybe the psychological and social impacts, 1 also touching on the idea of longevity through technology, which is kind of interesting. If I... I guess, we got on? Amazing. I guess one of my first questions is going to be, is aging a problem we need to solve? And maybe if you all answer them in turn.
I would argue yes. I would say, let's put it this way, what is aging, first of all? Well, aging is about a combination of various diseases and about debilitating conditions. Now, can I use your audience for a second? Okay, hands up if you want to have Alzheimer's disease, or cancer, or sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is loss of muscle mass. It will make you weaker and more prone to falls. So, my point is, nobody wants to develop what constitutes aging. The individual components of aging, the diseases and degeneration, nobody wants to have them. Yet somehow, when you talk about, oh, should we cure aging, there's some reservations to it. But nobody wants to be sick. Nobody wants to develop these pathologies. So yes, I would argue the goal of the research is to prevent these diseases, even abolish them. If we could cure Alzheimer's, that would be amazing. If we could cure cancer, heart disease, all of these diseases, that would be amazing. But if we could cure all of the diseases of aging, then we would have cured aging, really. And I think that would be wonderful, yes. Now, that's not to say there wouldn't be social consequences to that, which of course we have to consider and be aware of. But at the end of the day, we're trying to make people healthy, which I think is very hard to argue against.
I'm quite happy with making people healthier and curing diseases, but I don't think that aging as such is a combination of all those diseases. I mean, I have aged in my life, but that doesn't mean that I have certain diseases, right? I am aging, and we're all aging continuously. Now, if we want to cure that, then we are assuming somehow that that is a disease, a condition that is flawed. But at the same time, it is the human condition, or as part of what we are. So basically what we're saying then is that the human condition as such is flawed, and that being human, being in that particular state, is like being in a disease or having a disease. And I don't see it that way.
I weirdly sort of agree with both of you, but particularly what Michael said then, if you start talking about aging as being something to be cured or fixed, which is obviously a bit of a preoccupation within medicine, especially today, it does kind of go back to that idea of wanting to completely change your humanity. We are supposed to age, we are supposed to die. Don't enjoy people getting sick either. So if illness could be cured, then that would be fantastic. But part of aging and dying is human, so if we took that away or we fixed that problem, it's just getting that control back again, like I was speaking about. It's seeing that as a defect, as a flaw, something we need to control and fix. And I wouldn't say it would be a completely bad thing, but it probably wouldn't do the world any good if we all didn't age and didn't die.
Although it's interesting to
just make a quick point.
Yeah.
Because I do think actually that humankind and civilization is about a struggle against nature, against the things we don't like in nature. I mean, I have, the graph I showed at the beginning with increasing life expectancy, the reason we see that is because we now have medical, also sanitary intervention that allows us to diminish childhood mortality, which is incredibly low now. And that's wonderful. That's one of the triumphs of civilization, that children, by and large, don't die. I think that's amazing. The natural thing when a child has pneumonia, for example, like I had when I was a child, is you would die. That's a natural thing. But of course, in my time, there's antibiotics, so I've managed to live. And so do many other children when they're sick. So I think that's wonderful, and that's why we have microphones and glasses. I wear glasses. The natural thing would be for me, not to be able to look at you, but we have glasses, we have cars, we have airplanes, we have buildings, we have electricity. All of this is, in a way, overcoming what we don't like about the natural world. Now, you could argue what we should overcome and we shouldn't, but I don't think we should say, well, we should live in a pure natural environment, because we don't anymore. And that's actually wonderful in my view.
If I may respond to that, my point was not really that it's natural to die or to age and die, and that's why we shouldn't do anything about it, but rather that it is not only an essential part of the human condition, but also precondition of all life and evolution. I mean, mortality is something that drives change, that drives progress. And it is part of what we are. Now you might say, well, it doesn't matter if it's part of what we are, we might change. Yes, but then what comes in is reflection on how would the world change if we all became post-mortal, right? You said it's just a question of extending lifespan. That's not really radical, and that surely is good, but where's the limit, right? And if we find out what makes us age, which perhaps we will, then we might find a way to stop it and reverse it. And then we will be virtually immortal or post-mortal. And then we have to deal with the consequences. And I think it's important to think now, before we actually do this, is that the kind of world we want, right?
I was going to add on to that. It's probably go on for a while. So yeah, I agree with that. So what you said then about extending life, if we did find the cure to age, and this is almost a question directed at you, would it be a choice? Or would it be almost expected that everyone would have this treatment, almost make themselves post-human in a way by changing their body? Because that would change society, that would change the way everything worked. So if we did find a cure, or the medication like the Rigel, in that text, everyone has to take the medication, everyone has to choose to stay alive. What do you think would happen like in real life if something like that was created? Do you think we would all have to? Do you think society would completely change and everyone would be expected to take it? Or
So I don't think you're obliged, as long as if you're an adult, you have free choice. You don't have to take antibiotics. You can choose to die if you want to. So I always think it's a personal choice. I do think the vast majority of people between life and death will choose life, particularly healthy life. So I think it would be a global revolution, a global paradigm shift, absolutely. And I think 99% of people would take it, even if it was not compulsory, even if it was optional.
I wanted to pick up on something that you just said about like what would be the benefits of it, and what would not aging allow us to do, other than this idea of like, oh well, we could just live longer. Is there anything that in 100 years' time, let's say, for more than the 30 that we're talking about, like, what would it allow us to do? If humans couldn't die, what is the killer feature of that would, or what excites you most about not aging?
I'm quite happy with aging. I'd say the only thing that springs to mind out of examples I've read within science fiction would be people, it's so cliche, they perfect their art. So they have hundreds of years to perfect their music or their art, or a talent that they've had, and they've just worked for years and years and years. So that would be something, because one of you said about you'd have more time to do things. So it's like you said you don't have time to do certain things, and then if you lived longer, you would have time. So that's what I've read, but I will see what you think.
I think most of our ambitions are actually, we can able to fulfill them within a human lifespan, right? Of course, you might have an ambition that requires 200 years or 1,000 years, but I think that is very rare. Now, I often hear that argument that we can only be good in one certain field or a few certain fields, right? You become, I don't know, a tennis player or a philosopher or whatever, right? And you spend your life with that. But there's so many other things you could do, right? And you just don't have the time for this, right? Perhaps you want to be a professional musician for the next 100 years and so on. But it seems to me that this is an illusion, because we make decisions in this life. We make decisions to become a certain person, to spend our lives with certain things. And why would that change if, for instance, music is important to me, right? Why would I want to abandon that after 100 years and do something completely different? Or the other way around, why would I wait for 100 years? I mean, I would have to become a very different person. So it seems to me that the time we have, there's plenty of time to do everything we want to do.
So I do have something ambitious I would like to do if I could live more than 1,000 years. I would like to explore the stars. I would like to go to other planets, other star systems, and that would take thousands of years, and you're not going to do it unless you have an unlimited lifespan, or you can, do medical biostasis in some way. So yes, that if I could ask for anything, I would like to explore the universe, and that's going to take me some millions of years. So we have to sort out aging before I can do that.
That was one of the ideas I agree. Like,
all right, we'll go together.
We'll go together to the stars.
Cool. All right.
I'll throw it out to the audience. Are there anybody with questions?
Not so much a question, more an observation. You've talked that there's a sense here that there's a limit of the human body in one form or another, and I'd just like to take up on your point about exploring the universe. One of the questions we have to ask is, why do we stay in the body? Transfer of mind. In that case, we need to change our thinking, which is something I'm going to talk about a little later, and we need to change the way we think. Our whole exploration of being a human being would have to change from the threat-minded process that we have now to thinking about what we want rather than what we don't want, which is what we think about most of the time. We don't want disease, we don't want aging, we don't want these things. What do we want is the big question. And that is a very long-term goal. The other observation is about the universe. Eventually it will go for heat death. Entropy is trapping us all. We have to consider that as well.
So, go ahead. So regarding the heat, yeah, you're right. Universe will disappear one day, but it will be some trillions of years from now. I mean, I think we can talk about this in a few billion years again, and we pick this up. Regarding your point about what we want, and I think that's a very good point as well. What I guess, you know, I personally have a natural curiosity. That's why I talked about exploring the universe. But I mean, certainly, the human form could become obsolete, so we may be able to transfer our minds to a computer, mind uploading. I mean, if that works, I think that's fine for me as well, if we can find a better body. And just picking up also on your point about, I guess one of the difficulties about thinking about the future is that, we can predict how things will be 50 years from now with our current way of thinking. But we cannot predict how things will be 50 years from now if we have a completely different mind, if we think in a completely different way. So that's unpredictable. So who knows?
I'd like to challenge the speakers on 2 points at least. One is the overpopulation bit, and the other is that there are very many diseases involved in aging. Now, I'm not a biologist, but the biologists that I talk to say that one of the theories knocking around is that there is only one disease involved, and that curing aging is curing that disease, that all the others sprout off from it. Whether this is true or not, I don't know, but I leave it to you to discuss that. The other is the overpopulation thing. Now, in this city of Liverpool, we live in an 18th century city. Most of the roads are designed for horse and cart or horse and rider, and yet this is all over the world. We have people in the world who are still living in the Stone Age. They are hunter-gatherer groups. So it's not just a bunch of middle-class people in a library in Liverpool that we're talking about here. It is the whole human population. And the lead part, technologically, of that population has a declining population. The people are not as fertile as they used to be. Consequently, when you take the whole world, certainly you would look to have a Malthusian solution, famines and the like. But in actual fact, as people develop technologically and industrially, they stop having quite so many babies. The television is an astonishing contraceptive.
I mean, we've almost seen that as well, even in the last 100 years or so, as their life expectancy has gone from them knowing that their parents or grandparents died at 40 or 50, suddenly it seems more imperative to have children as soon as possible, whereas now we're seeing, as you say, people, when you expect to live till 90, you can leave it until 30 until you have kids. So, yeah, interesting point. Anything from the speakers?
So it might be true. I don't know the statistics that maybe there are less people being born than there was, but less people are dying a day than people are being born a day still. That's still the statistic. It's over double of the people are being born every day than dying. So overpopulation is still a problem. So people are living longer, but more and more people are being born every day. So that's kind of the answer to that one, really. But I'll hand over to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, the world population still rises in total, and the fact that in the Western world few children are born is compensated by the fact that we all live much longer than we used to.
So let me try to answer your first question, actually, which is whether there's multiple aging diseases or if aging is... I think that's something that biologists debate. I mean, my own view is that there is processes of aging that influence multiple age-related diseases. But there's also independent mechanisms in certain diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's. Having said it, it is certainly in theory possible to, reverse or stop all of those processes. I don't think we're going to cure aging within my lifetime. So the topic today is about 2049. I don't think we'll cure aging. I think we'll extend our lifespan. We'll have healthier lives. We'll postpone or retard age-related diseases, but we're not going to cure aging anytime soon because of the biological complexity of the problem. And if we are making people healthy, reducing hospitalization times and so on, that will have a social benefit to it. Of course, overpopulation is an issue, but that is an issue already. It is something we have to cope on a global scale. Even if we can retard aging, we still have to cope with overpopulation. And the major factor concerning population growth is, of course, how many babies people have, not how long people live. So that there's different ways of addressing that. But I agree, it is a problem, of course.
Pardon me. And one last question from the audience? Two? Yeah.
I know they're colonial tropes, but my understanding about sort of immortality is it tends more into the worlds of horror rather than science fiction. I was just looking at that section of the library over there. If you look at Dracula and the Mummy and Frankenstein and zombies, it's all about immortality in one way. And I was just wondering, in a post-mortal world, will horror films exist? And if not, what will be the new horror film?
I'm not sure. So there was a science fiction text that I read where everybody's been immortal for, it's been thousands of years. All that's left is war and toxic wasteland. The world is completely dead and there's no animals, there's no vegetation, there's just nothing, and everyone just fights, and yeah, it's horrible. Now they read poetry that they considered to be horror, and this poetry was written by the last mortal poet. So it was a guy who he had cancer, he was writing, and he decided he didn't want to choose immortality, and he chose to die of cancer. And his poetry is beautiful. And they read it as though he's writing about the natural world, and they find it horrible, they don't want it anymore, it's like they reject it, and it almost scares them because that's what the world used to be like. So that was their horror. So maybe that would be the new horror, because, in a world like that, what would they find scary about a zombie or the war or anything, because they just live in that world now. But then that's obviously just one example, so.
I don't know what the new horror would be, but it's an interesting observation that if once we imagine immortality, it is usually a horror story, right? That's all you said. And that speaks of an underlying fear that we have of the idea. What I mentioned in my short presentation, there's a horror of this endless horizon there. And perhaps, just perhaps, there's a wisdom to this fear. It might be different. Of course, we can imagine a life that is wonderful and very long, or perhaps endless, right? But perhaps this fear has a certain justification.
I don't really have anything to add.
The thing for me is, if you have human beings living longer or forever, the impact of that on the other species of this planet. It's like, this is not just for human beings. And then the other thing that I wanted to ask is the arc that you talked about, which is life, which includes death, the death of your parents, the death of your siblings, relatives, friends. That is part of what creates life and creates the magic of life and the urgency of life. Where would that go if there is no end to life?
Can I say just one more thing? If the Victorians had discovered immortality, then none of us would be here today. So by dying, we make space for new people, and that very possibility of new people coming into the world seems to me is a valuable thing.
So I mean, I agree completely that there are, cultural evolution and an evolution of mentalities that you build. I think it was Schrödinger who said that science is built on the death of the previous generation. So you need new ideas that it's a new generation that brings. So that has a positive contribution, certainly. And as you point out, we're already destroying species. So that goes back to the problem of overpopulation, which I say we have to address that, whether we live in 50 years or 70 or 100 or 500. So that's something we need to address as a species on a global scale. So I certainly, and that's something that I do think is a concern. And I think if we have people living longer, that would be a sort of, I was going to say, a sort of a cultural stagnation. I do think is a possibility that we have to be mindful of. So I'm not saying everything about a long, healthy life is positive. I think there are challenges to it that we have to address. Just like we have to address now. I mean, the reason a lot of people are here is because we've had antibiotics and we waged a war against infectious diseases decades ago that was by and large successful and allows us now to live longer, healthier lives than ever before in any period of history. And the lives we have now, I would argue, are better than in any period of history. That doesn't mean it doesn't cause problems. Sorry?
There are people who still have no electricity, who are still starving, who don't live up to being 40. So it's not true that it's better for everybody. And if you have a world of immortality, who is that going to be granted to and who is it not going to be granted to? It also raises a question of consciousness and social responsibility.
So that's a different problem, a question. It's an interesting one about sort of social equality. I would say, well, I wouldn't say this is a fact, that we have the lowest poverty malnutrition rates ever in human history. So we live better lives now as a species, humanity, than ever before. Doesn't mean it's good for everybody. Yes, there are people who still have malnutrition. People dying of starvation is actually quite rare in the world nowadays. It happens in wars, which is not an easy thing to fix. I mean, I would love to fix war. I would love not to be a war in Syria, but I don't think any of us has the power to change that. So actually dying of starvation is quite rare nowadays. That cases of malnutrition, even in the UK. So we live better lives than ever before. And I think that is amazing. And looking forward, we don't really stop medical research because there's people under malnutrition. You don't stop going for an MRI because some people don't have what to eat that day. But you could argue it otherwise. You could argue, no, we should have a communist-style system where everybody has access to the same resources. So that I think that's more of that becomes a somewhat social discussion. I believe in capitalism, so I think I believe in different stages of society.
I will just quickly say about the animal thing that you pointed out. We are at the moment living in a stage of the Anthropocene, so we have dominated the natural world, we've taken it for granted, and it is starting to be acknowledged. Like, we've almost haunted this planet with our presence, and we've just taken it for granted. So if we do talk about it in terms of immortality, that is an issue that could potentially, we could argue, get worse. But we can hope that as posthumanists, we would review that issue and it wouldn't be as bad as we could sit here and imagine. But if you like, we can chat more afterwards.
Yeah, sadly we've got to wrap up because we've got 5 minutes to change over and then we'll have some more speakers. But that has been absolutely fascinating. So thank you very much to our three speakers. Thank you. And if that's inspired any of you to come and give your own 5-minute talk, the next Ignite is happening on the 11th of August. 19th of August, correct? That's what I said. So you can come and talk to Neil in the purple T-shirt, and he'll tell you how to sign up to give your own Ignite talk, maybe about longevity or anti-aging. But thank you very much, and we'll see you in like 5 minutes. So thanks.